You're listening to Tapestry, a podcast by a music lover for music lovers. I'm your host, Kelly. Music is a thread that weaves a course throughout our lives. Join me on a journey to unravel that thread and bring you the stories behind what inspires musicians to create. Side note, Tapestry is an uncensored podcast. Don't say I didn't warn you. What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 39 of Tapestry, where tonight I had the pleasure of talking with Dani Rabin, who is the founding member and guitarist of Chicago-based jazz outfit Marbin. He left me with an astounding amount of philosophical takes. He mused about his thoughts on the lack of consensus in the jazz genre and the influence of the cultural zeitgeist on labels, how editing has opened the door to accuracy and what that means for people trying to preserve perfection, why his band doesn't rehearse, and at long last, an explanation of the story behind their song, Alabama Sock Party. Also, please note that since this interview was conducted, of course thanks to the COVID-19 precautions, Marbin's tour has unfortunately been canceled. So you'll hear us discussing tour dates, which sadly are no longer happening. That being said, most of the band members are conducting lessons via Skype and offering their musical talents to you in many ways. So if you're working from home or quarantined or on lockdown, whatever your situation may be, due to coronavirus, please go follow the links in the show notes and you can still continue learning all sorts of things from them while they are at home. Speaking of Alabama Sock Party, here's a bit of the song by the same name off their latest album, Strong Thing. Why don't we start with, let's just talk about you and your musical history.
Sure.
I know you're originally from Israel, and I'm real curious about that.
Okay. Well, yeah, I grew up in a town called Rehovot, which is about 20 miles south of Tel Aviv. In terms of music, I started playing guitar when I was around 14, not too young. I had a tiny bit of background in piano and did not like it, did not stick with it, and then kind of discovered guitar through rock and metal. And all my friends, at one point, all my friends from high school, like everybody played guitar. It was like a trend. And something about the sound of rock guitar soloing, and especially it started from the metal guys. It just grabbed me, that mysterious part in the song when people just take off and seem to just kind of like talk over the music. And it was really chasing that thing and that sound from style to style, from, levels of complexity that kept like deepening, all the way from rock and roll to fusion to jazz, with the shred guys in the middle, I guess. But for me, the thing that was really at the center was that high gain, saturated guitar sound, that post Hendrix thing that initially grabbed me. And I guess I stuck with it too ever since. Okay.
Now, that's a long time to be playing guitar and like know that, okay, this is my life's work, this is my instrument. And so you went to Berklee School of Music, correct?
I did.
Okay, so how the heck did you come all the way to America and figure out, all right, this is where I need to go, this is what I need to do?
When I was 16, my parents took me on a trip to the States, me and my brother, and I think they had, they maybe had it in their mind, so they took me to Boston and, just for me to check out, because I was really serious about guitar. And I remember when I was 16, I was just walking around seeing everybody with like a gig bag and drumsticks, and it felt a little surreal. So it stuck in my mind as enough. But I don't remember, honestly, being a senior in high school and like going through the motions of registering and organizing the move. And I remember getting there, but I don't remember any of the things leading to it. It's kind of, it's gone from my memory. It's very strange. I just feel like I kind of ended up in the States, and my dad came with me for like 2 months, and then he just hopped on a plane back, and I just kind of here since then. So it's a real missing piece.
Interesting.
Uh,
Have you been back to Israel since? A
yeah,
couple times?
I go almost once a year at least.
Okay.
So, well, not at least, sometimes more than that, but I try to go as much as I can. All my family's there, and I love it there. But you can't have a music career there. I mean, some Israeli musicians would disagree, but not the kind that I wanted to have, which is playing original instrumental music and making a living doing that, and making albums and touring. You know.
Yeah. Now, touring, I can't imagine you living in anywhere other than the US because Marbin's tour schedule over the last year, and I even saw your upcoming stuff. It's just insane. Um
Yeah, we
and
play a
I'm
lot.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'll ask you more about that later, just how you handle it all. But um when you came to Berkeley, did you have kind of the idea of Marbin or something, you know,
No, no,
unnamed and in your head already, or just sort of fell together?
fell together. I mean, yeah, when I went to Berkeley, it was a very interesting. Well, first of all, I've only been playing guitar for 3.5 years. Uh,
That's yeah, that's true.
when I got there, I started playing. I was into some shred guys, and I was okay at it, but I wasn't great. I didn't figure anything out. And I got there, and I went from being one of the best kids in the town I'm from to just absolutely nobody. Um, and I wasn't ever in those cliques of people who were the top students who got together and jammed, and those people were the selling point for these institutions. I spent a long time feeling pretty bad about how I sounded, and practicing a lot to get out of that, just in defeat feelings of inadequacy. I was really one of the guys that was just in their apartment working at it. Um, and really what happened to me about the second year of Berkeley is I figured out a way around the system. It was like a life hack. And what it was modern jazz, or really postmodern jazz. So avant-garde, free jazz, because a really interesting thing started to happen culturally. Um, there was almost like a hierarchy that was chronological. So it meant that maybe some people were into swing, and some people were into bebop, and some people were into post bop, and then the more modern guys were into Coltrane. But then there was a whole other thing happening in jazz, and free improvisation was kind of the spear tip of this whole thing. But the funny thing about free improvisation is that you don't need to know a whole lot about anything. You
Right.
just improvise and make no, and like the crazier noise you make, the hipper you are. So without having any sort of jazz language under my belt, really, and no chops, I just went straight there. I had this teacher, his name was David Tronzo, and he was doing prepared guitar and was really into John Zorn and modern composers like Messiaen and John Cage and people like that. And I went that direction for a while. And I started a band. It was called the Free Beer Trio. And we were just playing the weirdest most out things ever. Just making noise, playing the guitar with umbrellas,
Nice.
corks, chance operated music, rolling dice, just literally looked like a schizophrenic episode played out in a band. But it was fun. Any proceeds we had, we bought beer for the audience after the show, hence the free beer. And it's weird. Jazz institutions these days, there's not a lot of consensus about what jazz is, the rules of the game. To play any game well, what makes a game itself, are the boundaries, the
Hmm.
things you can and can't do. That's the difference between checkers and chess, even though they share a board. Some games don't share a board, right? Like reggae and Baroque don't have too much in common. But free jazz and jazz have swing in common, like the rhythm, right? So there, it's kind of the relationship of checkers to chess. But when you get to an institution, everybody's afraid to define anything because that especially if what they're saying is not with the zeitgeist, not with the spirit of the time, then they're in a dangerous place because people might think that they're not hip. So there was a refusal to define the rules of the game. So you had a lot of people that came to Berkeley to learn how to play bebop, learn how to play real jazz or swing or something like that. But the free jazz people were just standing beside the board and chucking the pieces at each other. And I was a part of that movement. And it's a powerful movement. There's a lot to be said about playing the game that way. It's very visceral, it's very immediate, it's very primitive, and it's not very refined. But because of the place it was in time, which was 2003 to 2005 to 2007, it was the time and place to do that. And I did that, and that was a lot of fun. But even in that, I always tried to do it well. I always tried to be good at it. But what does it mean to freely improvise well? You know what I mean? It's like once you really toss in your own personal aesthetics, your subjective aesthetics, into a game that's supposed to be chance operated, where there is no good and bad, then you're really destroying the game that you're choosing to play. And that's the process that started happening to me. I was practicing. Practicing means changing, but changing for the better. But if there is better, how can something be free? Free is just what is, right? So my attempt to get better at doing something free led me out of doing free things. And I started playing with a trio, and we started improvising, and I got back into like playing guitar solos, not just free improvisations, just lines over grooves, kind of jammy or Hendrixy. And then the drummer I played with, this was right when I graduated, he came with me to Israel for a summer. We planned to play there, and that's when I met Dani Markovic, who's the saxophone player in Marbin. And we met a day before our first show with that drummer that I played with at Berkeley. And then what happened was me and Dani started writing together. And we wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And we just had this ability to just collaborate, but really collaborate. But collaborating in a writing sense means defining structure. All of a sudden, nothing was free. It's like you're playing songs. It's the difference between architecture and interior design, right? Every time you write a song, you set up a building. When you improvise in it later, it's not free. It's like just moving around furniture, whatever fits against the structure you erected. Free improvisation doesn't have that. That's more like being homeless. Pushing your cart around, scaring people. So, it's and it's been that kind of trip ever since of writing things, erecting these structures, figuring out how to decorate them, and then moving on to new ones.
Now, I can tell you're a teacher too, because everything you just said is it was just illustrated in such an educational way. How long have you? Yeah,
yeah, there are a lot of bad teachers who don't do that.
No, but so I'll hop back to Marbin in a second. But you do teach guitar, right? And how long have you been doing that kind of alongside touring and just writing in the band?
Not that long. I mean, it's been years now. I guess 5 years or something like that. Ever since there was a demand through let me step that statement back. Before we started touring, I taught kids in a music store for a year and a half, and it was the most miserable time of my life. I hated it so much. I hated it more than anything. I mean, teaching children, immediately I realized that I was a glorified babysitter. and that the potential for learning was just not there. It was, and it's not me as a person to convince people about the merits of music. That's not the level that I can teach. I don't have the gift for that, to get people excited, to get children excited about why music is valuable. And that's really best case scenario what a teacher of a 10-year-old can do. Just expose people to that world and make them love it. To me, I started teaching really when Marbin was already a touring band, and there was a demand for people who saw me play at some capacity. A lot of people just saw some gypsy jazz stuff that I did for fun online, because a few of those videos went pretty viral. Or people that saw us at a show, and they would contact me, and then I would just give them start giving Skype lessons through the iPad, and trying to address people based on their specific needs and problems, and whatever way I could try to help them.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, and teaching is a weird kind of thing, you know. When you try to get good at anything, you know, it's like mountain climbing or something. Most people just see the mountain and are more satisfied hearing the story of somebody who climbed it than going through like a journey up it themselves, you know, because it's a lot of effort. They see how big it is. And then when you go up the mountain, you go through a marked path, right? That would be jazz as a marked path up a mountain, you know. And it's true for any kind of area of life, you know. But every now and again, the thing you have to remember about these paths is that if they're not kept, they erode, and some of them nature just wipes them out anyway, makes them obsolete, right? So when when Moses went up a mountain and got commandments down, and then, you know, said people to be afraid of the heavens, and then, you know, some other guys, physicists and astrophysicists, discovered that when you look up, it's not exactly the heaven. You know, it makes some things about some people's paths obsolete. You know, so time changes what's relevant when you go up into these kind of realms of skill and ability and ideas, and that's why you need people to keep trying to go up there, you know, to just kind of clear the brush for other people, right?
But yeah, seriously, you could have been a philosopher in another life, I think. Just I like these little comparisons you're drawing though between really everything.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when you're teaching, or really when you're performing, I guess the part about you as a professional guitarist, like, what is the most valuable thing that you've learned, that you've brought with your performing aspect and your teaching aspect? Do you have one big takeaway that you kind of pass on to everyone else?
Do I have one big takeaway? No.
No? Multiple?
I don't have one big one. I don't think there's one ultimate point that makes the whole thing tick. I think if there's one thing, it would be that being in music and having a life in music is belonging to kind of a different, I don't know, different world inside this world. And it's a world that's free of a lot of the stresses and the heartaches and the pain and a lot of the good things too of day-to-day living. And the more you go there, if you go there seriously and if you're progressing, the more you're going to want to go there. And that's true for listeners, and it's true for performers in a different way. And I think, I mean, I'm not, you know, it's like I can't take credit for anything that music, does. Music is just people making sounds, and organizing those sounds. But it's like, I guess what an artist is a portal into that world, you know, that's highly subjective, and it's just the way I see it. So it's like I have a certain set of likes and dislikes and aspirations, and I try to make, my peephole into this world as aesthetic as I can. And for people who like a certain kind of thing, I think I do a pretty good job at it, but certainly not the only one.
Right. So the thing I'm thinking of as we talk is you seem to really like to adhere to a certain type of structure, just thinking about the free jazz versus, what is jazz comparison. I saw that you had mentioned Pat Metheny as one of your influences,
Hmm.
and naturally I had to go back and reread his scathing critique of Kenny G. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of what you said, how you're just the window into all of this, and people are free to come up with their own opinions and associations. But much like Pat Metheny critiquing Kenny G and how he just kind of doesn't play by the rules or doesn't speak the language that's necessary, uh like, would you say that that principle is what really takes a scattered cluster of ideas into something more structured and more powerful? Sorry, that's a big question.
I think that you're bringing up the question of what is style and how important is that, right? The way that you would if you hear a sound, what compartment in your mind would you um, place it into,
Right.
right? What is this, a metal song? Is this a jazz song? I don't think it's the most important one. I think it's a pretty superficial one at the end of the day, because it's just certain kinds of rhythms, certain kinds of sound color, certain kinds of note choices, um, are the things that define those compartments. But I mean, there's such terrible jazz out there, and then there's Louis Armstrong, and even though they both use similar tools, they both would be in the same compartment. They're not even close to each other in the scale of quality, right?
Hmm.
So I think the question here is like, what has more? I would say that the most important thing in music is having a lot of quality, not qualities, but actual quality, like just being
Hmm.
good. Um, and I tend to agree and disagree with Pat Metheny. First of all, I think there's a lot of people who are terrible who he didn't talk about. So he talked about Kenny G because, not because of how terrible he is, but because of how successful he is.
Right.
And and uh, and that's and says Pat Metheny is also successful, but he sold about 20 million records, and Kenny G sold about 50 million records. So you know, and it's hard for a successful guy to see an ultra successful guy. I'm sure.
Hmm.
There's an element of jealousy too in the statement. Um, I don't know. I could. It's a cheap shot to go after poor Kenny. I mean, he is. It is corporate smooth jazz. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's very new agey and soft. But every time I remember reading that article and having to listen to Kenny G because I actually had no idea what his music was like. And the first thing I thought was that he kind of sounded like Metheny.
I mean, I grew up listening to both, and I actually listened to Kenny a lot before I listened to Pat, and I'm thinking, okay, it's
they
pretty,
have
you know.
they share that same kind of like pixie uh fairy dust vibe, like that, because neither is jazz, neither sounds like jazz most of the time. I'm not talking about Pat Metheny trio, but Pat Metheny group certainly has some smooth ass records
Yeah.
that are just as smooth as some. I mean, Kenny G does take it over the top, but I don't know. See the guy talk; he's that kind of guy. I mean, if you saw him talk and heard like Cannibal Corpse, you'd be pretty surprised. It's like it's just the music that flows out of a guy like that who's just, you know. It's just, to me, it makes sense. So, I mean, the subject you're bringing up is the hardest subject to talk about in music. You know,
The quality subject, you mean?
the quality subject,
Yeah.
because first of all, you got to ask yourself a question that's not easy to answer, which is like, is quality subjective or objective? Right? Is it
Mm-hmm.
in the song, or is it in you, or in the person? Right? Is it in the thing, right, in the object, or in the thing, or in the beholder? Is it just what you like? If you don't
Mm-hmm.
like Pat Metheny, does it make Pat Metheny any worse? If everybody hated Pat Metheny, would that make his music worse? That's
It's like Schrodinger's quality. Like if you're looking at bad music, it's only bad when you're looking at it or listening to it. But when you turn away from it, it's good. You know.
sure, but there's a different way of looking at it, which is that there is no such thing as that. Quality is neither objective or subjective. It's just in the event. It's the meeting between subjective and objective. Think about it like this: if you see anytime you think about whether something is good and bad, it's already past. That's a post the event kind of notion that you are intellectualizing. But there's a lag of time between the time you see the actual thing that you're trying to judge and the time that you're making a judgment. So it could be argued that the quality event is the thing that brings up the division between subjective and objective.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Because something happens and then you see it and then you see your thought, your feeling about it. But if you just look at it in time, right, the first thing that happens is the thing before you get to have your subjective opinion on it. So it's an interesting topic. I mean, especially it's interesting in the world that we live in, where the most quality things rarely have the most success in the market. If you're measuring success in a classic kind of sell, with money or something like that, and it's an interesting time to live, because a lot of people are taking pragmatic principles of what sells and making product based on that rather than on their judgment of what is good. And when you do that, it's proven you can make the McDonald's of music and appeal to mass audiences and sell them poison. But I know it on my own, like I can't watch a Marvel movie.
Oh,
I can't stand that
same.
shit. I mean, it's like if I start, I don't understand how anybody could enjoy it. It sickens me, right? I cannot do it. I can't get to the end. But and I feel like there's a huge group of people that's just starving for some quality and some meaning, and anytime they get it, they love it. So you get to choose who you're making stuff for. And you see, I mean, I see it with people who graduated school with me that moved to LA, and it's like, I got this great pop gig and another, with people, household names. But at the end of the day, like, what are you doing with your life? Like, do you really, like, what is the value of being Miley Cyrus's guitarist? No offense to
Hey,
that
she
guy.
needs a guitarist too.
Right. And he's doing a job, but at the end of the day, you get to make your own choices in life, and the person, making shit gets to be called a shit maker.
So that takes me to my next question. What separates you from Miley Cyrus's guitarist?
Uh, mm,
Hot seat question.
well, uh, being less of a whore. That's it.
You didn't ride the wrecking ball on stage, that's why.
No, I mean, I think I'm sure whoever that guy or girl is, they're great at what they do, and they probably would do a better job at it than me. Don't get me wrong on that, but you know, the difference is that for me, the most important thing is to play what I want to play, the way I want to play it. And for them, the most important thing would be advancing in their career, I'm guessing, or getting those exact kind of gigs. It's like maybe they like pop music and are happy with the direction that American culture is marching at. That's possible too. It's weird for me to every time I remember how much a part of anti-culture I've been all my life. How like it's just a small stream of people in this big big river of the mainstream. It's a stream and it's big, where like everybody who knows who Pat Metheny is just like this small little sideways dripping thing.
Now, through Marbin, just with working with other like-minded people and playing these types of shows, has that kind of put you in touch with other people who are sort of going against the grain and they have different expectations from music?
Yeah, I mean, I met a lot of the people who I'd consider at least my childhood heroes who are still living, and I feel the thing in common with all of them, as opposed to the pop people, would be that that they've made the choices with their life to take what they think is good to the highest level that they can take it. To go with some sort of, to be like, what is this thing that I'm trying to do that's perhaps like, it's like partly inside of me, partly some things I'm aspiring to become, and how do I constantly be in a space where I present it to people, right? The melodies, the songs, the way of improvising, the guitar sound, whatever sound, the attitude, right? The perspective. You wanna really be in a place where you're using the way you see the world as the main tool to how you present it to other people, right? And I feel like the other kind of thing is just the desire to be a little bolt in somebody else's machine. Just do the best job you can, make the whole thing tick. Don't be a problem. Play your parts well. Play with the right sound. Show up. Well, you should show up on time, regardless. But I feel like being a sideman is more similar to a pop gig than being in my role. But still, the sidemen in our band have a ton of freedom, and they can play anything that fits the aesthetic. I feel like people on those kind of gigs, especially when you have light shows and everything's on MIDI clocks, and now the way even your pedal board works, it's connected to a computer and switching all your presets in time with the song. So at a certain point, you wonder why people are even on stage anymore.
I've had that same conversation with my boyfriend where he'd rather hear a Frank Zappa or a Jack White who is not going to play everything perfectly, but they're going to kind of roll with the feeling they're trying to portray and everything. And I think that sort of aesthetic is maybe making a comeback where people want to hear really nicely structured stuff, but they don't want to just see a computer do it.
Well, editing has opened the door to accuracy. And accuracy before editing was more synonymous with perfection, because to play things very accurately, you needed to do it at such a skill level that it was clear that you were perfecting something. But it's not inside the accuracy, it's inside the chase of perfection, right? Accuracy is just a symptom, but if you just sharpen your songs by moving things in time and making things cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, that striving for perfection bit is gone, and all you're left with is the accuracy. And it's kind of like that's, if you think about how you do any woodwork or stonework. You can get more and more refined the more you work, but every time you touch it, there's less of it. So that's what you're feeling now when you see these solos that people are putting on Instagram that are totally edited. It's like, ooh, it's very inside something, but it's just very little of it. It's not substantial, right? A
Yeah.
Hendrix solo is like a very heavy meal. Those things are like a chiclet.
I'm gonna be thinking of these metaphors like all night. There's really a lot of great imagery I have in my head now. Um, to draw another comparison, then I think it was from your Bandcamp page. You had in the description of your latest album, Strong Thing. You said that, of course, referring to Marbin, unlike other bands that record an album and then tour to promote it, we approach our albums more like comedians creating their specials. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Well, the idea is to use your experience playing live to refine, and not really refine, change the songs, the way a comedian tells a joke. Since laughing is easier than clapping, because it's more of an involuntary and immediate response, so you know what works and what doesn't work. With music, it's trickier. You can feel, like comedy, you can feel like something works at home, but you have to be very sensitive on stage to know when it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's a crushing feeling of humility, like of being humiliated. It feels just terrible. Like, you just wrote this section and you thought you were, Rachmaninoff at home, and then you hear it in front of people, and it's this thing. I don't know what the equivalent is for women, but for when men are interacting with beautiful women, there's always this thing where you just become self-conscious of yourself in a way that's like, ooh, your belly's big, and it's the hair in the right, are you combed? Like all these things that 5 minutes ago were not a part of your range of consciousness. All of this, it's what people say, being self-conscious in the negative. It's that feeling of self-consciousness. Is everything in the right place? And I'm not talking about audience reaction. I'm talking about your own judgment on yourself when you're in those heightened kind of states of noticing. And that's what being on stage gives you. It gets you in touch with your own choices from a perspective that's a little bit more external than what you can produce at home. And it gives you this mirror that you can look at and fix things. And it's an opportunity you can either take or not take. But if you've made an album and then went to tour to promote it, you don't get that chance. So for us, we take these songs on the road, and if there's a section we don't like, we change it. And then we talk about things in the car after the gig. It's like, ooh, those chord changes, I don't know. Ooh, what was that solo? Ooh, that melody doesn't work. Ah, that groove is sloppy. It's like, and then things change and change and change until they settle, or until you just become too lazy and too frustrated with something and you just have to do something. So you keep something the way it is. But regardless, it's a choice. You try your best with what you have at the time, and you let things kind of settle the best way they're going to settle to your judgment. But you don't let putting things on a piece of paper be the final decider on how a piece of music gets to be, or on Pro Tools. The idea is that if you think about records, files, record cabinets, then you want to have an event to record. You're not making records if you're just going in the studio and recording something from you. You're skipping a big part, which is the song having a life.
That's an interesting perspective, and I guess that leads me to ask you next. Would you say that by the end of a Marbin touring cycle, like with Strong Thing, for example, your latest album, could you have written the album and then you essentially just tour it night after night, gather all your data, reflect on it, and you essentially come out with almost a totally different album?
Oh, yeah. And I think that's a big part of why you should see a show. because well, I mean, if you see the show early on in the year, closer to where the songs are being written, it's not like it's terrible choices. We're pretty skilled at what we do. So to me, something that doesn't work, it still works. It's like the progression still, like a chord progression I'm playing on, I'm not happy with. I'm probably played okay solos, but that's not what we're going to keep. So compositionally, things do change every few weeks, I would say, but it's minor changes. But yeah, some things get irrecognizable after a year, for sure. Some things get abandoned,
Yeah.
and I still, there are a few people who saw us play this song we used to play that we just kind of never made it on the record, and that was their favorite. And they're like, what about this, this one thing that you used to do at shows, and it it was just only available live and for a few hundred people in a point in time, so I think that approach that's the big advantage. It makes the shows a process of growth for the musicians too, not just for the, it's everything becomes much more liquid.
Mm-hmm. So I have two questions about that. When you're at your venue of choice and you're working on stuff, one, how do you guys actually approach that kind of resettling and reconfiguring process? Like, how do you do that on the fly? And then two, would you say that the upholding the novelty of live music, is that kind of in response to the streaming era that we live in?
Well, I'll answer part two and then part one. I don't think, well, consciously, no. I mean, that's just the whole playing live is the essence of music to me. It's what I like to do. It's with my time. It's not the cynical thing where it's like I just do it for the money or the attention or like the all the other things that come out of it. The thing itself is how I like to live. It's like I really like playing. I really like playing live. And when you're playing jazz, the unfortunate thing is that your music gets to be alive only for the durations that it's played. Like holograms of recordings do very little for me.
Yeah.
Especially from the, like, I have the need to play, not to listen. So it's very, I just like it, I mean, I don't know, the way that little kids like playing with their choo-choo train, it's like on that level. So it's important for me like that. Part one of the question was what? Remind me? How do
you guys adjust all this stuff on the fly?
Yeah. With the best we can do at the moment. So if something doesn't make sense to me, a chord progression, then I try to think of another one that might work. And then I'm like, hey, John, the bassist, like, hey, John, can you play these chords instead? Or if it's a groove thing, it's like, hey, can we try this 6/8 thing instead of a 4/4 thing? It's not rocket science, but I think the thing about complexity that people don't understand is that it's very rarely something like a very big and complex unit that you're not understanding. What's happening is that it looks vast, but it's a million very simple things that are put together, and you can't see the seams because mastery of something makes things seamless. So I have the harmonic knowledge of knowing, like, if I'm in a cadence and I have an F7 going to a B flat, whatever, I can use a B going to that B flat. That's just like one thing. And it's a very simple principle. But once you know 5 things or, 100 simple things, and you know how to interchange them, then you just have a lot of options. And every single one of those options is a simple thing, but they create a structure, like a network that's complex. So at this point, knowing a lot of songs and haven't made a lot of albums and haven't thought about it all day for a lot of years, I just kind of have a lot of vocabulary of how I can get from point A to point B. And if one way doesn't work, and I suggest another. And I'm not so vain to think that it's beyond failing. It's like I just understand. It's like, oh, I need to play that and see how it feels to play it. And if it feels bad, I'm not going to be like, no, that's the choice I made and I know so much. It's like knowing a lot just means that you are aware of a lot of options, but you still have to like throw them into the world and see what it feels like to make them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
makes sense.
Don't skip the testing. The testing stage is my recommendation. No matter how skillful you think you are, it's because you just don't know. You gotta see. There's a lot of factors. Each drummer, each bassist is different. Each song is different. Each tempo is slightly different. Things feel a certain way once they're played out in reality.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of each drummer being different, you have a new drummer on this record, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how has your new record, Strong Thing, stacked up against your other, like not 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, many
7,
yeah, other 7 releases?
Yeah. I like it the best. I think we played the best. The prog community criticized us for abandoning the strategy of recording that we had in the second and third album, which is just tons of instruments, really layered sound, lots of edits. But I don't know, for me, I've just with time I've become less and less interested in music that never happened, and things that are just MacBooks come with GarageBand.
That's what you're being recorded in right now.
Yeah, but it's like anybody can sit there and layer percussion loops and layer all these things, but the one thing you don't get to have is a voice doing that. Just that thing, a thing that like has flight, and it's like that actual flight in music that's becoming more and more interesting to me. I just started to see it in the way I listen to music. Like I was in those early days of Marbin, I was really, I think it came out of Matheny, but chasing this kind of perfection in orchestration and layering and lots of interlocking parts and creating new textures. And I think just touring that much, it just felt funny, and I remember what it felt like to tour, like right when we released Last Chapter of Dreaming, our third album, the one with like really the biggest production we've made up to date. And but we were a quartet, and we were just playing those songs, but we were playing them the way that 4 people sound when they play songs, just they sound like those 4 people, not like 25 people. And to sell those albums after our shows was such a weird thing. And and knowing that I'm sending all these people home with like, Coca-Cola and Sprite cans, that I've just stood there and gave them one thing, and, both coming from me, but it's like, what's kind of inside this ethereal imagination of how music could be. And then the other, like really using the studio as a tool. And the other one was using the studio as a record maker, something that makes records of what we do, and at a certain point, I mean, they both have value, I still remember the 90s and early 2000s where it's just like you sit there and it's taking you on like a trip through Africa. And it's like so visual, right, and vivid, and like it's huge. But I don't know, it's like I wouldn't want to do another thing like that unless I had a huge band. Like if I could afford all these people and somehow make that sound in a room. I don't know. I mean, call me old fashioned, but I'm just more curious about real things.
Yeah, when's Marbin getting the snarky puppy treatment where you have like 12 people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. But again, I wouldn't want to do that either, because that's to coordinate 12 people, you gotta reduce freedom. I enjoy my freedom, I enjoy not having to, it's less, not having so many people to potentially clash with. The
Right.
amount of improvising that goes in our show is tremendous. It's a lot. It's all the time. I mean, I don't have parts, barely
Yeah.
ever.
So with fewer people, you have a higher degree of freedom, but what would you say your biggest challenges are just in everyday writing? Like what does a typical Marbin writing session look like or sound
There
like,
are
I guess?
there are no Marbin writing sessions. There's just me and Danny getting together to kind of. It's fast. Just there's either he writes a piece of melody, I write a piece of melody, or we write something together. And there's not too much about to say about that because you don't know where it comes from. It just comes. You have an idea. I mean, if you clear time for it, it's more likely that it will come during that time rather than when you're in the supermarket. A lot of people don't like sitting down, to writing. They like to have writing come to them. I never understood that, but we write when we need songs, it took me forever to learn not to do the other thing, which
Yeah.
is, you know, like Bach had a gig that needed new music every week. We don't have that. We have 1 hour to decorate in a year. So to overwrite and stuff the drawer full of music for me creates anxiety and frustration about not being able to get to all the things I write. I understand the pace of my output in Marbin, and I also understand that when you do that, when you're trying to write an hour, then if you have one kind of song, the next kind of song can't be the same kind of song. So I also have kind of this idea about how the different things balance each other out to a degree. If an idea comes, you got to see it through. But yeah, usually what we do is me and Danny will write the melody, write some changes, take it to the band. They figure out some parts that go with it, and then we immediately start playing it. We don't rehearse ever. We just,
What?
yeah, never. Only maybe sometime like the day before tour, we'll take a rehearsal space in Chicago for like 2 or 3 hours and just teach them the parts. And then we'll just kind of run through bits and sound check. And then at a certain point, we'd be like, okay, call the song. And just do it in front of people and see how it feels. See where you fall on your face. And figure it out from there.
Wow. That's pretty insane to me to think of, but I guess it could be because I am a child of the internet where everything is it's just presented to me in such an edited, packaged, perfect way. It's kind of
Yeah.
the narcissism of perfectionism that you need to be validated by you putting your absolute best, most clean, accurate foot forward instead of just sort of hearing what comes out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the problem with that kind of approach is that you have to live with this constant, since you're not showing yourself, you're just showing the image of yourself that you've made, then there's always the anxiety that you'll be found out and your energy goes to uphold an image, but you can easily grow in a different direction than that image. But if that image gets the fans, then you will have an anxious life because it's just feeding a lie, about your technique, about your skill level, about your ability, about the perfection that you put in it.
Yeah.
It's much better, I think, to be in a place where people get used to, learn to love the shitty things about your time too. Because they're everywhere. The
Yeah.
imperfections but again, there's a lot of imperfection. I don't want to give that advice prematurely because a lot of your imperfections are things that you need to get rid of because they're just the things making you suck. Some other ones are the things that make you who you are. The problem is that there's a lot of babies getting tossed with bathwater lately. you know
Yeah, that's hard. Oh God, what a profound statement. Now, if Strong Thing then is kind of the apex of your discography, then how are you going to improve on it, and what is in the
Oh,
rafters?
well, right now when we're touring, we're not playing anything off Strong Thing. Our whole tour now is the next album. Um, we're just working out the next batch of song, and easy. They're just better songs. They're, you know, I I learned a lot about you know about making albums. I learn a lot every time I do it. I do all the editing myself, and last one there really was not a whole lot to do. But the recording process, it's funny. It's just getting simplified. Next album's going to be done in a much nicer studio than the last one, and the last one was already nice. So we have a deal with Sweetwater. You know that company?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to do it at their studio. And they're going to actually sell tickets. I think 16 tickets for people to watch the whole process
Cool.
of making that thing. So yeah, that'll be interesting. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think better songs. Hopefully, we've gotten better at playing. I mean, I certainly try to practice as much as I can, and take the next steps in my playing. Trying to see the weakness and fix it. But it's really an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Now,
not easy to get better.
no, no. I always love to bring up the Jojo Mayer quote about how if you sound good when you practice, you're really not practicing. So, would you
That's
agree
true.
with that? And
I
what's
agree
kind
with
of
that.
your practice philosophy? How do you practice?
Jojo Mayer. It's so funny. He opened for us or played before us in a festival
Cool.
in Disc Jam, and and I remember I had to take a selfie with him and put it on our Instagram and be like, I can't believe I finally got to meet Yo-Yo Ma, and I thought it was hilarious, but he wrote me didn't like that. uh, yeah, so
That's great.
yeah. Fucking love that cello. So philosophy and practice, I think the main difference between people that practice and people that don't practice is whether you like yourself as you are, or you want to become something else, not somebody else necessarily, but something else. And practicing is practicing. We do it's doing, right? It's doing, and it's thinking. And I would say that there's a difference between what you would call study and and learning, right? Learning is more like developing skill. Study is something you do by observing. And there's a whole lot of studying that has to go into music. You have to really look at music, look at songs. When I say look, I mean listen, and really start clearing up the picture of what's going on rhythmically and connecting what's out there with your senses to what you're perceiving. But then also there's a dimension of picking up the skill and learning it on the instrument. But realizing that it's a process of change. Did you ever hear the story of how caterpillars become butterflies,
Oh, sure.
right?
Yep.
The cocoon. So you hear what happens inside the cocoon.
I mean, I guess their body kind of turns to liquid and then turns into a butterfly, but
Right, right. But inside there is no caterpillar, right?
true.
So the thing they were doing the test, they were trying to see if there's memory, right?
Mm.
So what they did is that they put this very stinky substance that repels caterpillars on a stick and made them smell it, and they all had this, developed this aversion. They made certain caterpillars develop this aversion, and then they let it go through that thing where they basically melt and become something totally different, right? There's no, if you open it, it's just soup. But then the butterfly still had the same aversion, right? The ones that were exposed to it. So something does pass, right? There's this like whole idea of like a complete transformation that you don't, but it's something small. You know, I don't know how much in common I have with 17-year-old me anymore on music. We don't have the same likes or dislikes, but we do probably move our body kind of the same. You know, that we have general things that are, more nature than nurture, I guess, that remain like the same kind of core. And you can't get, I think there's a certain things you can't get rid of in yourself, or, maybe you don't even want to, I don't know. But I think real practice has to do with really letting go of all the mechanisms that are trying to stay fixed. You're always trying to save yourself. You're trying not to become that soup, and not to become that butterfly. And it makes sense not to change. Life is short and time goes one way, but you really can't hold on to anything. And getting better is a process of changing. So I think the people that get better really embrace this, and want to become something, what they say, make something of yourself. It's a very deep statement.
Yeah. Man, I needed to hear that. That's, you almost have to learn how to practice. I mean, it is a very difficult process.
I think it requires a lot of, a few things that people have a very hard time with. So, one of them has to do with understanding what's good, seeing quality and understanding what quality is. And everybody feels like they can, so that's also tricky. Some people can't, though. You see it. And I think it's even beyond that. It's like something like you see a big picture. Everybody can tell a big picture that's beautiful is beautiful. But once you start thinking about what makes that picture beautiful, right, and your mind starts drawing you to certain elements in the picture that are maybe more essential than others, then you have kind of more of a sense of direction that pulls you through the tunnel, right? And that's what I would consider talent. And then there's intellect, just understanding things about how to learn, how to be disciplined. And intellect also requires intellectual honesty. So you don't only need to understand where you're going, you need to understand where you are. And a lot of times we don't like to take these looks at ourselves naked in the mirror. There's always something that you don't want to see there, and it's like, oof, I wish that wasn't right there on my hip. But I really don't want to go to the gym,
Right. Yeah. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah. So a deep look has to, also tells you the amount of energy that it's going to take to solve the problem. A lot of times, it's a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm. Man, so many good takeaways from this conversation. I do have one other way less serious question for you.
Sure.
It sounds like when you guys have live shows, you do what's called story time. And that's where you explain some of the names behind your songs.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me how that came about, and do you have a favorite Marbin track title? Because I'm pretty sure that mine is Spank Tank, but...
Spank Tank's pretty funny.
That, or maybe Alabama Sock Party.
Yeah. Story time in our shows, I tell the stories of where and when and basically what happened to name. We name all of our songs over these evenings that we have on the road. I always say on stage that we barely survived. Some of them we survived easily, but they're funny stories. And we were out a lot, and we were out since we were really young. Started being full-time road guys from, 23, something like that, 24. And we played a lot of dive bars in the early years, so we just saw a lot of crazy people do a lot of crazy shit, because we were just out late and partying, and, everybody was out, and it was a good time. So, yeah, there's a lot of stories. I'll tell you I'll tell you which one you say. Alabama Sock Party.
Well,
Alabama Sock Party is
I mean,
actually
whatever your favorite one is, if you do have a favorite.
favorite. Oof, I have a lot of favorites. Um, Alabama Sock Party is really not. It's not. I don't tell that one ever because it's not. It doesn't have a punchline like some of these do. But it was just a bizarre scene. We were playing in Huntsville, Alabama last year, and there's this hippie there. And his name was Trey, and he came to our show before, like the year before when we played Huntsville, and we stayed with him that year before. And his house was like total shithole and like filthy. And he was like, "Guys, I moved to a new place. It's great. You guys should come crash again." And we're like, it's a new place, like nicer than the last one. It's like, "Oh yeah, like much nicer." So like we go in, it's like immediately there's like a can of cat food just like sideways, like on the door. It's like on right by the entrance door. We open the
Yeah.
door and just look, and it's just like filthy, freezing in there. Right? It's like winter. Everybody's like huddled around a radiator in the middle of the room, like homeless people on a garbage can. There's like this, like the oven's on. Nobody's like watching it. This guy's like burning a pizza in there. Anyway, and they give us like this weed, and it's so strong, and me and Danny don't have like tolerances up at all, but we're just like high, just like so high. And they start playing this game on the TV, something with like associate, and like the main guy that invited us is like trying to give us like he knows like about the Marbin Strikes Back and all that stuff in the social media, so he's trying to like give us shit to get us to be like playful, and like we're talking to each, and then we're just giving him insane amounts of shit back, and we're making the joke, we're talking in Hebrew, we're making the joke between us that like on tour every time like we just get to the situation where we're in hell, but we always manage to become the devil. And anyway, so we're just having like a good time. We're really high, and then this guy just comes up to us, Trey, and he goes like, "Hey guys, you guys, I give socks to musicians." We're like, "What?" We're like, "What?" It's like, "Come with me to my bedroom." It's like,
Oh God.
like no, like what are you talking about? It's like give me your shoes. Like, what? I'm not giving you my shoes. And then he just like takes my shoes off my feet, and I have big feet, and he has little feet, and he puts his feet in my shoes to like check the size, and he looks like Sideshow Bob. He has like it's like these huge shoes on his little feet, and he's walking around. I'm like, oh my God. And he's like, "Hey, I have the thing for you. Like, what's your favorite color?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm not 5. I don't have a favorite color." And it's like blue. I was like, "Okay." It's like blue Flintstone socks. I'm like, whatever. And it's like, "Here are yellow Flintstone." And he just like, it's a whole scene. He drags me to his room. He gives me socks. And that's pretty much the end of the story. But it was bizarre. You see why I don't tell it? It's you had to be there.
Oh, I'm still laughing, but I mean that's just,
Yeah,
I
it's
guess
creepy.
that's a real hazard of being a musician on the road with
Yeah, right. You don't know what color socks you're
God.
gonna get.
Well, speaking of giving people shit, I have to say when I looked you guys up, I believe you probably run the Marbin Instagram,
Yeah, I do.
and I had a blast looking through some of the posts
Thank you.
because you respond to trolls on your posts in such a hilarious way. But I think my favorite thing was when you posted, "We let a Jew into a church with a saxophone, and you won't believe what happened next." And that lady was just like, "Hey, he can be in a church," and you're like, "Really?" You know. I just thought, okay, it's refreshing that someone's out there just spending just as much time replying to people who are just pissed about stupid stuff on the internet. And it sounds like you don't give a shit, so.
No, I don't care at all.
Yeah, it made me laugh. It seems like it's like the running gag. Like you scroll through your Instagram and it's like, some videos of you playing, some tour announcements, and then like 75% just
Right.
ripping people a new one on Instagram comments.
Yeah. That's. I mean, we haven't been getting a lot of negativity lately, and it's really been bringing me down. Because I thrive on that. But
You need something to do.
Yeah, and a lot of people too are like giving me fake negativity just to get a strike back. That's been a trend, but I can sense when it's not real hate. Real hate has this like real trolls have this belligerent feeling about them, like a guy stumbling out of a bar.
What's the worst diss that you've ever gotten, like as a musician or on the internet?
Oh, I've
Probably,
gotten, I've gotten every kind.
yeah.
I don't think there's a kind of diss I haven't gotten. Too much, too little, too ugly, too this, too that. It's just, it's, it's, it's never ending. It's the internet is the gift that keeps giving
Truly.
when it comes to criticism and insult.
Well, I have to ask you this then,
Yeah.
to be a little more serious. If you could give any advice to someone who wants to become a professional musician, what's your best advice you can give them?
Well,
Don't feed the trolls.
feed the trolls. No, I don't. I don't. It would have nothing to do with the trolls. Um, you know, I think the best thing to. I recently talked about this with somebody I don't remember, but it's the story of like in books when you read about ghosts, like what ghosts metaphorically stand for,
Mm-hmm.
or what happens when you bury something incorrectly, right? If something doesn't have a proper burial, then that somebody will become a ghost and haunt you, right? If it was your job to bury that thing or person. And I think your dreams um, are better being properly buried if they're not going to work than improperly buried, because having a ghost of a dream is a very bad thing to do. So if you want to be a musician, be very serious about it. Give it your all and understand that if it succeeds, you get to live your dream. And if it doesn't, you get to give it a proper burial and you won't spend the rest of your life regretting anything. And you'll be able to move on to the next phase of your life feeling very good about yourself rather than very bad about yourself. And I think that's what matters. So, if you're making fear based decisions about touring, about making albums, about investing in yourself, I would say don't do that. Give it whatever resources, and within reason, obviously, and energy that you have. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but you'll know that you tried.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Full of so many little good sound clips, honestly. Thank you for sharing that. I know
You're
it's like
welcome.
a, oh, that's such a cliche question, and it probably is, but I just like to hear everyone's philosophy on that.
No.
So, is there anything else you want to mention about Marbin or upcoming shows? I know
Yeah,
I'm
we're
probably
we're
gonna.
living on we're living on tour this Friday.
Oh,
We're
okay,
playing
yeah.
tons of shows all the way to the southeast. Two cruises, maybe going to be
Mm,
quarantined.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Fingers crossed.
we'll see. But yeah, I mean, to come to shows, go to facebook.com/Marbin Music, bandsintown.com/Marbin to see show dates, bandcamp.com/Marbin Music to get music. That's it.
All right, I'll drop those links at the end of the show. But then, Danny, I have to ask you one more question before I let you
Sure.
go. If you had to only listen to three albums for the rest of your life, what would they be and why?
Oh my God. Well, Astor Piazzolla has a album called Tango Zero Hour. It's always been my favorite album. I don't know. Every time I kind of came back to it through the years, it's always maintained its quality. It's so interesting. So that's one for sure. Some sort of Django Reinhardt compilation, probably. Because not because I don't know his albums, but because I just he just doesn't have like many ones that I like from beginning to end. I like the greatest hits, um, so I tend to like that. Ooh. Songs of Leonard Cohen, third one, another all-time favorite. But I don't know, I'm kind of sick of it now. third one's either Leonard Cohen or Frank Sinatra.
Oh, which Frank album?
Oof. Oh, there's so many good ones. Wee Small Hours, probably.
Okay, I approve.
Yeah.
Had to hit you with that. So,
Yeah.
well, I'm gonna see if you guys are getting anywhere close to me. But I actually realized that you hit Pittsburgh back in June of last year, and I didn't know who you were, or else I would have been there. So
well, we're coming back. We're coming back. I think same place. Maybe in the
yeah,
fall.
yeah.
I think this fall.
I'm gonna try to put it on my list.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah, Danny. Thanks for spending your time with me, and I really appreciate your thoughts.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's a wrap with my interview with Dani Rabin from Marbin. As I said at the beginning of the episode, unfortunately due to the coronavirus and its impacts on the performing arts, their entire tour is canceled. So if you can, please support them in any way possible by checking out their websites. You can go to marbinmusic.com. That's Marbin, M-A-R-B-I-N. Marbinmusic.com. Check them out on Spotify, Apple Music, all that stuff. They're also at marbinmusic.bandcamp.com, on Facebook, and also Bands in Town. They're all giving Skype lessons, phenomenal musicians. If you're looking to improve your chops, now's your chance. As always, thanks for listening.